Recently, we received news from the president that our economy had 0% inflation in the month of July. President Biden is misleading the American people on inflation. It is true that energy went down, but other important items went up, like food. Over the previous month, food was up 12% on an annualized basis for the month of July. Electricity was up 19.2% on an annualized basis in July. Just to name a few items that went up in July besides food and power, new cars and trucks, medical care, and shelter were all costing you more. Don't believe what Biden is saying to you about zero inflation. Look at your checkbook or your credit card statement. You must protect your family from the ravages of inflation. You need to find out if gold is right for you. Go to blackandwhites.us and on the homepage, click on the gold bar and get connected to our gold guru, Ira, at Advisors Metals. And ask Ira, is gold right for me? It's time for Black and White, a show that wants to bring all of us together, talking again about the issues that concern us. It's time to hear from people who only want to deal with facts. It's time for you to re-engage in your right of American free speech. It's time for Black and White. Welcome back to Black and White, and we have today a famous guest and a person that I've interviewed over the years a couple of times, Dick Morris, who has a new book called Return. And a man of his stature, I always get a week or so in advance of something that they want to be on, and I'm thrilled to have him on. But I asked them this question. I asked Dick this question before we started, and I told him this is what I'm going to ask him. Has anything changed since the time I got the press release on you wanting to talk, and today that you feel is important that you want to talk about?
Good, sure. First of all, thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Interviewed before, and I look forward to this. Yeah, I think that the Democratic strategy, first of all, the title of my book is The Return, and subtitle is Donald Trump's 2024 Comeback. And I predict that he's going to run, of course. I think he'll have a lock on the Republican nomination. I don't think he'll have a serious primary fight. And I think that he'll win. I think the thing that's changed is that the Democratic tactics against Trump have changed completely in the last week or 10 days. Before this period, they felt that they could defeat him in the political process, in the electoral process. They felt that they could beat him in an election or get somebody to challenge him in the primary who could defeat him, or at worst split his vote in the primary and then weaken him for the general. I think the precedent of Ted Kennedy running against Jimmy Carter, dividing the Democrats so that Ronald Reagan could win, was very much in their minds. I think that now they have seen the string of victories that Trump has had in all of the primaries so far, where his endorsed candidate has always won, with the exception of Georgia, but every other state, he's just cleaned the clock. He's just gotten them all elected and nominated. And I think that they've decided that the only way they can beat Trump is through the judicial system, through the courts, to try to keep him off the ballot. And I think they've changed their whole strategy from a political one to a judicial one, a criminal justice one. And I think it has two objectives. I think one objective is simply to annoy him and incite him so that he rages at them and harass them by going after his family and his business and everybody he knows. And the goal of that, I think, is to get him angry so that he explodes and he becomes the issue. And people talk about him more than they talk about Biden. If you think over the last month or so, Biden almost doesn't exist anymore. And all the news is about Trump. And in American politics, you can only have one person on your mind at a time. Mm. And for example, in the election of 2020, Biden wasn't on anybody's radar. Nobody cared about Joe Biden. The only issue was, would Trump get reelected or not? And I think that that's what they're trying to restore now. And I think that was part of the motivation for Mar-a-Lago and for the New York indictment of his business associate and all of the stuff that they've been doing. I think the second motivation, which is that they want to bar Trump from the ballot by invoking the 14th Amendment that says that a person that engaged in an insurgency against the government of the United States cannot serve in elected office. That provision was inserted into the 14th Amendment in 1866, 1 year after the Civil War, in the first congressional election since after Appomattox. And the South sent the 4 newly admitted Southern states, sent a delegation filled with Confederate generals and officials. The vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, was elected senator from Georgia. And the the administration said, hey, we didn't gain on the battlefield to give it away in Congress. So they inserted a clause into the 14th Amendment saying if you were involved in a revolution against the US or a civil war or an insurrection, you can't serve in public office. And they are incredibly enough trying to use that to stop Donald Trump from running. And they first convened the January 6th committee with the objective of trying to get evidence to do that. But it didn't, it fell short. And there was plenty of rhetoric, but there was no proof. So they got a search warrant to search Mar-a-Lago. And with the search warrant, you have to have probable cause. And the only thing they had probable cause for was the archived documents. And the triviality of the archived documents is attested to by the fact that they let Trump have them for 2 years before they pursued him. I mean, if these are the nuclear codes, or this is our top secret national vital things, what do you let him keep them for 1.5 years before you go after him? And even after they raided him, it's been almost a month since they've taken action. So this is purely a pretext. And I think the reason for it is that they want to get evidence about January 6th to try to frame Trump as an insurrectionist against the American government. And that, I think, is what's behind what they're doing. And I think that it's horrible, it's despicable, it's phony. But there is some credibility to it because there's a Washington, D.C. grand jury that would hear this case, and they would indict a ham sandwich if it were a Republican. And I think it's very possible that Trump will be indicted and will have to run for president while under indictment. I think he'll win anyway. I think the indictment will be tossed before it ever gets to trial. But I think this is the move they have planned. And this is the hit that I predicted in the return he was going to have to take before the election.
Dick, there's some of my Washington contacts have told me as of last week that, and these people are maybe as close to the president as you are, but basically they're saying that the Donald Trump who would win re-election and his approach to his second term would be dramatically different than what he had in his first term. And what they're specifically saying, Dick, is that he underestimated the power of the deep state, and he depended a great deal on people in the Republican leadership for helping him pick his key cabinet officers, many of which resigned and replaced. What I'm hearing is that if he is reelected, he will devote the entirety of his presidency to going a deep dive into the deep state to do everything within his power to get rid of it in 4 years.
I think that's completely accurate. I think that his first year appointments were largely dominated by advice that he got from Reince Priebus, who was former head of the RNC, who was his chief of staff. And I think that it was shaped by the establishment of the Republican Party. I think that now what he's going to do is something he telegraphed about 3 weeks ago in a speech he gave at the America First Summit, where he said that he would invoke Schedule F, he called it, of the Civil Service Act to exempt from civil service protection virtually the entire federal bureaucracy. I mean, not postmen, but yeah, I mean, everybody who's in a vaguely important position.
Mhm.
And what that means is that he could hire and fire at will. Now, the precedent for that is that he did that in the VA, the Veterans Administration, where he was so frustrated at their lack of change that he had Congress pass a law that's in effect now, saying that nobody that works from the Veterans Administration has to go through civil service to be fired. They can just be fired by their boss, just
Mhm.
like you or I can. And he is going to extend that to the entire federal bureaucracy. There's a great line that I remember that Bill Clinton once told me. He said, being president is like running a cemetery. You have thousands of people under you, but nobody listens to you.
That is a great line.
And
So,
I think you're completely accurate about that.
yeah, it's but what my source is telling me, Dick, and you may agree or not, it's your choice, is that he's not talking a great deal about this. Um, he's thinking very hard about it and what he would do, and some of the people who were with him before may not be with him again. Um, and he some people think that he abandoned some of his instincts in making cabinet appointments, and that he depended on people instead of depending upon totally on Donald Trump to make the decision. This time around, if he gets reelected, it's going to be Donald Trump's decision.
Well, I think that you have to divide Trump's term really into three pieces. The first year or two when he was getting started, that was completely true. He appointed Rex Tillerson Secretary of State, who had nothing in common with the Trump agenda. He appointed Jeff Sessions, Attorney General, who was opposed to the Trump agenda. And they all betrayed him and he got rid of them. Then in the next year and a half period before COVID, he basically governed himself, and he took charge of foreign policy. He got the Secretary of State Pompeo in there, who was doing his bidding. He shaped the National Security Council to his interests, and he really was able to, for the most part, run the government himself. Understanding that you can't rely really on a lot of people to do it for you, because the deep state and the bureaucracy is so entrenched. These guys sit there and they say, hey, I've been here for 20 years. I'm going to be here 10 more before I retire. You're here for 4 years. Call me back. and that's kind of their attitude. When I worked for Clinton in the government, that was so clear. There were times when I remember one meeting I had with the Department of Education staff. And I was pushing the idea of free community college, and they were opposing it. They said we should put the money into teacher training and more teachers and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I said, well, the president's decided this is what he wants to do. Can you walk me through the specifics of how this might work? And they kept arguing against it. And finally, after about half an hour, I said back to them, hey, remember the president? You remember him, tall guy, Southern accent, and lots of hair. He's the one that wants to do this. So
Right.
do it. And at that point, one of the key participants walked out of the room, but the remainder did it. But that's the fight that every president has. And I think Trump is well versed in it. The third part, of course, was the COVID period, which was completely different. I think that Trump's weakness is that he's not always very good at picking people, because he's so taken by himself and so wrapped into his own ideas and his own thinking that it's kind of like a Freudian shrink talking to a patient. But the patient says, oh, everything, he just said everything on my mind. And in effect, the Trump projects his own views and his own personality into the person he's talking to, and believes they agree with it and believes they go along with it when they often don't. So I think he's going to be much more selective this time around, but also much more ruthless in what he does.
Right.
And I think that he'll really let a lot of heads roll.
Well, we're going to take a quick break and come back with Dick Morris. The book is, and where can we get the book?
Oh, anywhere. I haven't been banned yet. I'm on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles, and those quaint little holes in the wall we used to go to called bookstores.
Bookstores, right?
There
Yeah,
too.
absolutely. We'll be right back with Dick Morris.
Hello, this is Dan Perkins, your host for Black and White, and I'm also an investment advisor with over 50 years of experience in investing. Inflation is at a near 50-year high and perhaps going higher. The capital markets for the first 6 months of 2022 was the worst performing in almost 50 years. 2 generations and perhaps more have never experienced this level of inflation. You may have had some significant declines in your portfolio of investments in the first 6 months and are asking, what does the future hold? And by the way, what should I be doing now? I have grave concerns that we have not seen the peak in inflation. And because it may be around for some time, I want to introduce you to the Black and White Gold Ownership Program, run by Ira and his team at Advisor Metals. So go to blacksandwhites.us and click on the gold bar to take you directly to Ira to work with him to see if gold is right for you in your portfolio in protecting your investments. This is Dan Perkins. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back. And we're speaking with Dick Morris, who's the author of Return, a book about the possibility of Donald Trump being reelected in 2024. I'm curious as to what you think based on where we are today, looking out to 2024, which is a long way out, what do you think will the issues be in that presidential campaign?
Well, it's hard to say that now because how do you keep track of Biden's incompetence? I mean, how do you know what his next screw up is going to be and to be able to predict what the issues will be? I believe that the economic cycle is proceeding ruthlessly. As soon as Biden set it off by exploding a bomb at the start of his administration by spending 1.9 trillion dollars in an economy that was already saturated with spending because of the Trump stimulus stuff in the wake of COVID. That kindled this huge inflation. And the inflation, as you know, can only be stopped by a recession, by high interest rates. And that's what the Fed stepped in and has done. And the inevitable consequence of this is 2 years of recession with mounting unemployment, with continuing inflation, because they won't have the guts to cut it off entirely. And I think that it's the economy, stupid. But who knows? I mean, China could invade Taiwan. With the weakness that Biden is showing, anything is possible. The more interesting question in my mind is who will the president be? I think that after the 2020 election, the Democratic leaders will go to Biden and say, and I predict this in my book, The Return, will go to Biden and say, listen, you led us into a fiasco in 2020. We can't have that again. In 2024, you have to announce that you're not running again. We won't throw you out using the 25th Amendment. We could, but we won't. But you have to announce that this is it. You're not running again. And I think when that happens, he will in effect become a 2-year lame duck. He's already weak. He's already manipulated and run by the party. But when you combine that with his losing Congress, both houses, he's really going to be a lame duck. And he'll have the ability to stop things from happening, but he won't have the ability to make anything happen. And I think that that's going to be the reality. In the meantime, the Democratic Party is going to be totally taken over, even more so, by the left. The history of left-wing parties, and I go through this in my book, is that whenever they lose an election, as I think they'll lose 22, they move further to the left. You'd think they'd move to the center, but they don't. They don't get the lesson. They move further left. They say, oh, we didn't turn out our base. We didn't deliver on our promises enough. We got to do better. And more importantly, organically, the moderates and the independents who are holding them back from going crazy leave the Republican primary and don't vote, leave the Democratic primary and don't vote in it anymore. And only the crazies are left, and they move the party to the left. After Reagan defeated Carter, the next 2 Democratic nominees were Mondale and Dukakis before they got sanity and nominated Clinton. And the same thing happened in Britain when Thatcher defeated Callaghan. the next two candidates of the Labor Party were Kinnock and Foote, crazy leftists, till they got sanity and nominated Tony Blair. So that's what I think is and I think the other element, of course, will be that the Democratic Party will resort through Biden to increasing, or whoever is president, to increasingly tyrannical means to try to suppress Trump. I think that the expansion of the IRS is only the first step. I think that just as they used the IRS in the wake of the 2010 elections, in which the Tea Party swept the House and Republicans gained power, they used the IRS to wipe out the Tea Party. It died around 2012, 2014, killed by federal audits. They didn't do anything wrong. There was no embezzlement. It wasn't like Black Lives Matter, but they were audited by Lois Lerner so incessantly and demanded to produce all documents and come up with minutes and come up with everything, that an organization that was never heavy on its staff couldn't cope with that and ultimately had to fold. That's a variant of what they're going to do now. But instead of aiming it at opinion leaders in the Republican Party, they're going to aim it at voters. And they're going to use these IRS agents not to dig for rich people's money, but to go after the middle class, go after people working class, waiters or waitresses who rely on tips, the solo practitioners, individual self-employed people, Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, mom and pop stores, bodegas. And they'll sit down with them and they'll say, hey, look, we think that you underestimated your tips from last year. And 2 years ago, you deducted this meal and you said it was a business meeting, but we checked with the restaurant, you ate alone. So we can indict you right now on 2 counts of tax fraud, but we're not going to do that because you seem like an honest guy. But don't provoke us. I mean, don't do stuff that absolutely is in our face. That Trump sign outside on your lawn, I mean, that's an invitation to an audit. And the bumper sticker you have on your car, that's doing you no good either. And for heaven's sakes, don't let my boss know that you went to a Trump rally, because that drives him ballistic and God knows what he's going to do to you. And I think we're about to see a reign of terror and intimidation using the tax code and the tax enforcement to try to cripple the guts of the Republican Party. Now, the counter to that I suggest in my book is that as soon as we take control of the Congress, particularly the House, we need to eliminate the appropriation for these extra agents from the budget and pass a budget that does not include those. Biden will then veto it. We'll stand our ground, I hope, and we will then have a government shutdown over the issue of the extra IRS agents. And we'll win that shutdown because public opinion will be with us. And we may be able to spare the country this agony, but that's going to be a big issue in the next 2 years.
The president is supposedly this afternoon going to sign an executive order to waive between $10,000 and $20,000 of college loan debt for tens of thousands, if not millions. And the estimate is about $300 billion that would have to be added to the deficit. Now, I would like to think that I'm from Middle America, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. I have 4 sons. They took out Stafford loans, which was the minimum loan you could take. And that paid about 1/4, meaning not 1/4 of, but 1 90-day period of their entire college education. I paid the rest so that all 4 of them go to college. I get no relief.
You look poor.
And I look at parents who have sacrificed their home equity to help fund their children's education, and they get no relief. My inclination is that this could be a very big issue for mainstream America, about especially all of us who have helped pay for our children's college education, and only a certain percentage of people are going to get a break on their debt. And what we don't understand yet is that $300 billion goes on the backs of those people who are blue collar workers because that debt is still there to be paid.
I have a point of view on that that's kind of unique. I believe he'll have to do something about the debt, and you're right that it's an injustice to those who've paid. But the essential problem is the cost of college. And the essential reason for that is the tyranny that college faculty exercise over their institutions, where when college enrollment swelled dramatically and went from an elite thing to everybody went to college, the faculty expanded with it, and they kept the rights of tenure. Tenure originally was granted only in elite institutions to scholars who would be told, you don't have to work much, give us 3 hours in class so that we can show you off, but do your research, publish, and bring prestige to our school. Now, when it's a mass institution, it's kind of like an advanced high school, everybody's got tenure. And the result is that they work 12 hours a week, 12 contact hours a week. Some work 6, some work 9. The very rare professor or faculty person works 15. Nobody works more than that. And the debt, the college costs that eventuate from that are enormous. The administrative salaries usually amount to about a quarter, as opposed to a tenth, which they should, of the administration of the budget of the colleges. And as long as we pass programs like free community college and debt and student loan repayment, we'll feed that increase in costs. Already the cost is stopping a lot of people from going to college, thinking they don't need to, and they just go right into the careers. And I think that we have that the government, the administration, should take action to force colleges to make their teachers work more, make their faculty work more, more contact hours with students, cut administrative costs, only incur debt where the debt is related to revenue raising, like building of dormitories, but not, other stuff. And I think that a program like that could significantly reduce college tuition and eliminate this barrier for people. And that's what I think. And I think the federal government should say, we're not giving you student loans. We're not giving any of your folks Pell Grants. We're cutting you off entirely until you adopt these changes. And the ultimate power of the Democratic Party rests in the faculty lounges of these colleges. And I think it's time we challenge those.
Dick, in the couple minutes we have left, I want to change the whole subject matter to something that's dear to me. I'm a writer. I can't say I'm a writer like you, but I'm a writer. I've written a number of novels and books. Tell the audience about, where does the inspiration come from? Where does the ability to write so many books and do such tremendous commentary, where does it come from?
Anger, wrath, rage, frustration, like what goes on. Frustration, just, I've been at the top. Before I wrote my first major book, I was Clinton's chief advisor for a year in the White House. And I could kind of change anything I wanted. I'd read an article in the morning about a school bus crash, and I'd call the Department of Education, and we would draft a package of school bus safety measures for seat belts and other stuff, and we'd get it implemented by executive order. And that was really cool. And then after I left, I had no power at all. And I watched everything around me where I kept saying, do this, do that, do that. And nobody listened. So I decided to put them in books and to write them.
Well, you've had an amazing career. You've been a tremendous resource for our country. And I like your openness and your candor, and you call things like you see them. And I wish you great success with the book. And thank you for joining us today on Black and White.
Let's repeat its name, The Return, Trump's big 2024 comeback.
Right. And it's available at Barnes & Noble and Amazon and those little corner bookstores that can order it for you. Dick, thank you for joining us today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The federal government just reported that the rate of inflation for the last 12 months was 8.5%, close to a 40-year high. This is Dan Perkins with Blacks and Whites. Prices continue to rise on other commodities besides oil. I ask you, what are you going to do to protect your money and your investment? It's time for you to take a serious look at gold for your portfolio. If you've had enough empty promises and misleading statements by the Biden government, isn't it time for you to take control of your money and your future? Go to blacksandwhites.us and on the homepage, click the bar of gold to be taken directly to IRA and Advisors Metals to ask the question, is gold right for me? This is Dan Perkins.